Tonight, imagine you wake up with a fever. You reach for a thermometer. You check your symptoms online. You call a doctor or you take a pill, and within a day or two, you expect to feel better. That is your normal. But for most of human history, none of that existed. No thermometers, no germ theory, no pills. Getting sick did not mean visiting a clinic. It meant something far stranger, far more frightening, and far more revealing about how people once understood their own bodies. So what did it actually mean to get sick before modern medicine? Let's go back. Start in ancient Mesopotamia nearly 4,000 years ago. If you fell ill here, your first thought was not bacteria or viruses. Those words did not exist yet, and neither did the ideas behind them. Your first thought was, what did I do wrong? Illness was not random. It was personal. The Mesopotamians believed sickness came from angry gods, broken taboos, or curses sent by enemies. A stomach ache could mean you forgot an offering. A fever could mean a demon had slipped inside you while you slept. So who did you call? Not a doctor in the way you imagine one. You called an ashipu, a kind of exorcist priest, whose job was to diagnose which spirit or god was responsible and drive it out with chants, rituals, and symbolic objects. Only after that failed might you see an ASU, a more practical healer who used herbs, bandages, and simple surgery. Two systems working side by side. One treated the invisible cause, the other treated the visible symptom. Neither had any idea what a microbe was. And yet clay tablets from this era, studied extensively by historians of ancient medicine, show detailed lists of symptoms and remedies that feel almost clinical. Careful observation wrapped inside a worldview of gods and demons. Now travel to ancient Egypt. Here, something remarkable happens. The Egyptians began writing down medical knowledge with a level of detail that would not appear again for centuries. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents ever discovered, contains hundreds of remedies for everything from burns to digestive problems. It describes wrapping wounds, setting broken bones, and even recognizes the pulse as connected to the heart. But right beside these practical treatments sit spells against demons of pain and incantations to ward off unseen forces. Practical and magical, tangled together on the very same page. Why? Because to the Egyptians, the body was not separate from the spiritual world. If your heart ached, that was not just an organ malfunctioning. It might be a sign your ka, your life force, was under attack. Doctors were often also priests. Healing a body meant healing a soul at the same time. Was this backward? Not exactly. It was a different logic entirely, one where physical and spiritual health were never separated in the first place. Move forward to ancient Greece, and the picture starts to shift. This is where a man named Hippocrates enters the story, a physician so influential that doctors still take an oath bearing his name today. Hippocrates and his followers proposed something radical for their time. Illness was not caused by angry gods. It was caused by an imbalance inside the body itself. They believed the body contained four fluids, called humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health meant these four fluids stayed in balance. Sickness meant one had become too much or too little. A fever suggested too much blood. Depression suggested too much black bile, which is actually where the word melancholy comes from. Sounds strange? It is. But notice what changed. For the first time, sickness became something you could observe, measure, and reason about without needing to blame a god or a curse. This was one of the first steps toward medicine as we now understand it. Historians of science, including those who have studied the Hippocratic corpus extensively, consider this shift one of the true turning points in the story of healing. The Romans inherited these ideas and pushed them even further. A physician named Galen, working centuries later, took humoral theory and built an entire medical system around it, one so thorough it would dominate medicine in Europe for over 1,000 years. Galen prescribed treatments based on balancing the humors. Too much blood? Bleed the patient. Too much phlegm? Induce vomiting or sweating. This is where the practice of bloodletting comes from, a treatment that would persist, almost unchanged, into the 1800s. Think about that. A theory built without microscopes, without an understanding of blood cells or infection, shaped how sick people were treated for nearly 2 millennia. Galen was brilliant for his era. He dissected animals, studied anatomy carefully, and wrote extensively on the human body. But because his authority went largely unquestioned for so long, his mistakes became embedded in medical practice for generation after generation. Now picture the Middle Ages in Europe. If you got sick here, especially during a serious outbreak, the explanations multiplied even further. Illness could mean an imbalance of humors, exactly as Galen taught. It could also mean divine punishment for sin. It could mean the air itself had become corrupted, an idea known as miasma theory, the belief that foul-smelling, poisoned air carried disease. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the 1300s, killing an estimated one-third of the population, doctors wore long beaked masks stuffed with dried flowers and herbs, believing the beak would filter out the bad air before it reached them. They had no idea a bacterium, carried by fleas on rats, was actually responsible. And yet, terrifyingly, some of their instincts were not entirely wrong. Bad smells often did correlate with unsanitary conditions, and unsanitary conditions often did breed disease. They understood a pattern. They just misunderstood the mechanism completely. Here is the deeper question worth sitting with. If none of these ancient people understood germs, viruses, or bacteria, why did any of their treatments ever seem to work? Sometimes they simply did not. People died in staggering numbers from conditions that are treatable today with a single course of antibiotics. But sometimes treatments worked by accident. Rest helped the body recover, regardless of the reason a healer gave for prescribing it. Certain herbs genuinely contained compounds that reduced pain or fever, even if no one understood why. Isolating the sick, even for superstitious reasons, sometimes slowed the spread of contagious disease. The logic was often wrong, but wrapped inside centuries of trial and error, some real functional knowledge quietly accumulated. Everything changed in the 1800s. A French scientist named Louis Pasteur demonstrated that microscopic organisms, invisible to the naked eye, were responsible for disease and decay. Around the same time, a German physician named Robert Koch developed rigorous methods for proving that specific germs caused specific illnesses. This was germ theory, and it did not simply add new information to old medicine, it replaced the entire foundation beneath it. Suddenly, sickness was not a punishment from a god or an imbalance of mysterious fluids or bad-smelling air. It was a battle against microscopic organisms that could be observed, studied, and eventually targeted directly. Within decades, doctors began washing their hands before surgery, hospitals began sterilizing instruments, and by the 20th century, the discovery of antibiotics meant that infections which had killed people for all of recorded history suddenly became curable within days. So what does all of this actually mean for you? It means the confidence you feel walking into a doctor's office today, the assumption that illness has a traceable physical cause, is remarkably recent. For most of human history, sickness sat at the crossroads of religion, philosophy, and guesswork, because that was the only framework available. People were not foolish for believing in angry gods or imbalanced humors. They were doing exactly what you do now, taking the best available knowledge of their time and trying to make sense of an invisible, frightening problem. The difference is that their best available knowledge simply had not yet discovered the microscope. And maybe that is the real lesson hiding underneath all of this. Somewhere in your own body right now, there is likely a process happening that modern medicine still does not fully understand, something future generations will look back on the same way you look back on bloodletting and beaked plague masks. The fever, the confusion, the fear of getting sick has not changed in thousands of years. What has changed is only the story we tell ourselves about why it happens. And that story is still being written.